Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. I thought this afternoon I would like to speak a little bit about nature of time. This is something that has a big effect on our lives and our practice, and we take for granted, but we seldom think about it or really understand what we're talking about. The idea of time in Buddhist philosophy was something that was discussed in the Abhidhamma, and there were variations between the different schools about the nature of time. One factor that's pretty well universal is the division of time into the three times of past, present, and future. In the Theravada system, the Abhidhamma teaches that only the present is real. That the past is unreal because it has ceased to be, and the future is unreal because it's not yet manifest. So the only real existence is in present moment. This was contested by Sarvastivada school. The name means all exists, because one of their central doctrines was that past, present, and future all have some kind of inherent reality. And there was also a third middle position held by some other schools, some minor schools, that the future is unreal, the present is real, and the past is partly real and partly unreal. What is real are those past events which have not yet come to their completion, primarily meaning karmic acts done in the past that have not yet come to fruition. And after they have their result, then they cease to exist in any kind of reality. These are all different kinds of philosophical approaches to the idea of time, of past, present, and future. For one thing, it shows that people back then were thinking seriously about these questions. This was a major one of the major divisions between the schools was on the nature of time. From a purely subjective point of view, which is what really matters to our life and our practice, it is really only the present moment that is real and efficacious. It's only the present moment that we actually experience. When we have a memory, it's a thought formation based on the past, but it's experienced in the present. And we know that memory is not always reliable. It's not a true vision of the past. It's a mental creation in the present that has its origin in past events. Likewise, speculation about the future. We're not actually time traveling into the future when we speculate or plan or worry about the future. We're still in the present moment, but our mind is taking as object imaginary events that might or might not come to pass. So whatever the ontological arguments about the reality of past, present, and future, in terms of experience, it's only the present moment that we ever experience. The mind is always in the present moment. Now the idea of a present moment is also kind of a slippery one. There's a Tibetan teaching called the Yoga of the Three Times. their approach to this question is the past is unreal because it has ceased to be, the future is unreal because it has not yet come to be, and the present is also unreal because you cannot see it. As soon as you look at it, it has faded into the past. The idea of a present moment is somewhat of an abstraction. In ancient India, they had various systems of subdividing units of time. I think it's pretty well universal in human cultures that the most basic divisions of time, we use the motions of the heavenly bodies. The rotation of the earth is a day, movement of the earth around the sun is a year, and so on. And then the subdivisions of a day are more or less arbitrary. And in ancient India, they had various systems of subdividing down to very minute divisions that we would, in our modern terminology, we would say in microseconds or nanoseconds. They had units of time, very small. And there was actually in the Abhidhamma the idea that there's a discrete, smallest possible unit of time. A single mind moment. But there's a problem here in that it takes a sequence of mental events to perform an act of cognition, up to 17, depending on the exact nature of the event, but up to 17 discrete moments, mental moments, performing different functions to perform an act of knowing, an act of cognition. So the smallest unit of time that we can perceive is already a duration. There's already some small but finite series of events happens in the process of cognition. So the present moment is kind of a smeary blur. It's not a point, in terms of subjective reality. And even that is difficult to experience. I say difficult, not impossible. The mind is ordinarily not aware of discrete moments, even at that level. The ordinary mind, we're blurring together, several moments in our experience. With methodical meditation, vipassana meditation, you can get that time shorter and shorter. Part of the development in practice is making the mind sharp and quick, so it no longer feels blurry or spread out, but noticing discrete moments. And there is experience that one can have in vipassana when it's going well and meditation is deep. You can experience things in a very choppy fashion, like a strobe light, rather than a smear of events. You can seeing each moment discreetly, so that the actual experience of the mind at that fine level is, to use modern parlance, is digital. It's not analog. There's discrete single moments of experience. It's compared to film. I think modern film is different. When you go to the movies, it's digitized, but the old style film where you had still photographs on a reel running past the projector, and there would be so many per second, and you actually see the characters moving around and so on as if it's actual motion, but what's actually being presented is a series of very rapidly presented still images. And that's pretty close to how the mind actually experiences the universe at a fine level. This is a single moment after single moment. Sometimes you hear the advice given in various teachings about stay in the present moment. And that's generally, I would say that's a pretty good guide, but you have to be careful and understand, think about a little bit about what that implies, what that means. Staying in the present moment means being present with experience, because you're in the present moment anyway, right? Whatever you're doing. And if you were to take that advice overly literally, you basically be living like an idiot if you're only in the present moment, because we need to have our memories of the past, things that we've learned, and make associations. So we have to have our knowledge of the past, our memories, as guides for our present actions. And we also have to sometimes project into the future to plan. You plan your day, you make a schedule, you make appointments for next week. This is something you're doing. You're doing it in the present moment, but you're letting the mind dwell on events outside the present time. But I think where it makes sense, try to be in the present moment, is, this is where experience is. It's in the present moment. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. Particularly when you're trying to develop meditation, but at any time really, if your mind is overly dwelling on the past or on the future, then it's missing the experience in the present moment. The past is that which has been done and said and done in times gone by, and it has its weight in terms of causes for setting up the present moment. But it's nothing in the past can be changed or modified. Causality doesn't work that way. We can't reach back and change the past. So what's done is done. And regrets or remorse on the past are wasted mental energy. Likewise, projecting into the future, it's either negative or positive, which either our hopes and dreams or our fears and anxieties. And in either case, we're letting the mind become obsessed or concerned with things that are not yet real and may never be real. That is, again, wasted energy. There's a place for sensible planning, looking at contingencies, playing the probabilities, making your plans for what you're going to do. But once the plan is made, then there's no benefit in dwelling on it. And attention should be primarily on this present moment, what we're doing, what we're experiencing. Anything you do, you're going to do it better if you pay attention to what you're doing. So you're present with the actions, with emotions, which is not to exclude the past and future altogether. The past is our experience in the past. If you're doing something, you're doing some job, you're doing some carpentry, you're building shelves or something, you use your experience from the past. You don't have to invent everything brand new each time. You remember what worked well in the past and what mistakes you might have made, and do it better in the present. And you also, running ahead, planning somewhat and thinking, you plan it out, how many boards you need, what lengths you're going to cut them, and so on, so that the mind has a coherent scheme. But the primary focus should be in the present moment, what you're doing, how you're doing it. The passage of time also is something to be aware of in terms of finite lifespan. Now, this is something that becomes more and more evident as you grow older, that lifespan is finite. When I was a young guy at university, I had one professor who was an older guy, and I guess he was kind of cranky, and he made a remark once that stuck with me, although at the time I did not understand it at all, where he was coming from. He said, "All you young people, you think life is too short. Wait till you get to my age, you'll understand it's too long." And I mean, I kind of understand what he's saying now, but I still think he was cranky. That's one of the contemplations that the Buddha recommends that we do frequently, is the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? You know? Because each day in your life is one day done and less. You know, you're never going to have that day again. And awareness of our own mortality and the finiteness of the lifespan gives an importance and an urgency to our activities and to our practice. You don't want to come to the moment of death unprepared. But the other contemplation that's beneficial is to think sometimes in terms beyond a single lifetime, to think in terms of the multiplicity of lifetimes. And if this is done properly, it can put your life and your experiences into perspective. It's pointless, and in fact the Buddha cautioned against becoming overly concerned thinking about past lives and future lives. Fruitless speculation of where was I in the past, where will I be in the future. But to have the understanding or the view that this is part of a continuum can affect your experience and your practice. The most useful way of looking at it is to think about this life as eventually going to be a past life. You can't do anything about what you did in your past lives. I mean, it's the same as past in this life. It's something done long ago and can't be changed. But you can change what you're doing now, and what you're doing now sets up conditions for future existence. So it can be useful to contemplate what kind of conditions am I setting up for my next birth. One time in Thailand, I got a very bad dose of food poisoning, which is a kind of a hazard. And I was extremely ill for several days, and I couldn't hold anything down. It was, coming out both ends, and I was just wrung dry, and it was still, my whole digestive system was lurching and just coming out with mucus only. And I was laying on the floor in my kuti, and I was delirious, hallucinating, and mind going into all kind of weird places. And I had a moment of clarity, and I thought I could easily die in this condition. I don't want to die with my mind so confused. I was afraid, where am I going to go next if I die in this confused state? So I made an effort to force some kind of clarity into my mind, to try and be in the present moment. If you are in a condition like that where you think you might die, it can really focus your mind. You get to kind of see what's important at that moment. There's an exercise that I've seen done where people are meditating, and the leader says, the meditation will end when I ring the bell 3 times. But if I just ring it once, just stop for a moment and ask yourself, if I died right now, what would be the state of my mind? Where would I go? And rings the bell and you catch yourself daydreaming or worried or something, then, oh geez, what's going to happen now? The condition of our life for each of us and our experience right now at this moment is the result of a vast series of previous lifetimes and conditions set up for this particular birth. None of us could have done too shabbily in the past, because we all here come back as human beings. That's a major plus, and it's actually quite rare in the cosmos as a whole to take a human birth. On the other hand, we couldn't have done too well because we're still here in samsara. We didn't become arhants, so we didn't quite get the first prize, but we're still in the game. So you want to try and set up conditions in your mind that are conducive of positive, wholesome karma. Avoid negative states, particularly states like ill will and anger. Avoid states that will drag your consciousness down to lower levels. Give up any resentments and remorse. Encourage loving kindness, compassion, clarity, wisdom, and keeping the precepts. These are the ways to foster conditions for a fortunate rebirth. We should also remember there's no guarantee of escaping the lower realms until you reach stream entry. So that should always be something of importance, to find the unconditioned. That's your safety. There's your safe, secure refuge. So we have these various approaches to the concept of time, and we measure time in different ways. And as I said before, in ancient India they had various systems of subdividing time. The ancient Indians were very fond of extreme numbers, and when they took the approach of looking at time, they investigated what could be the most minute divisions of time, but they also looked at vast expanses of time. Contemplating that as a way of giving us the big view, get us out of our personal kind of preoccupations and concerns. It's some little nugget of homely wisdom that I remember from my younger days, is somebody saying, what's it going to matter in 100 years? And if you extend that, what's it going to matter in a kappa? You kind of put your personal drama into perspective when you contemplate large spans of time. The Buddha used this also as a teaching on impermanence. He would say to the monks that you see the great ocean, you see the mighty Himalaya mountains, and you think they're permanent, they're stable, they're never changing, but day will come when the ocean is dried up and the Himalayas are reduced to dust. So this kind of contemplation of impermanence has these different levels. It's all related to time. And I spoke about being aware of your own mortality and looking at individual moments. That's also another form of contemplation of impermanence, the shifting, changing reality moment by moment. But there's also this third kind of level you might call cosmic or geological time. You're looking at vast stretches of time. Those of you who are driving back to Thunder Bay after the talk, you're going to drive past the Northwestern Mountains. You might contemplate that 200 million years ago, those were huge raging volcanoes. And now they've weathered down to kind of stubs of their former self, and they're quiescent. So your whole life you drive by them, 20, 40, 60 years, you see these mountains. They don't seem to change, but they are actually changing, but just at a different pace. The earth itself is changing, and the sun. The sun is gradually using up its fuel, and there's a finiteness not only to our lifespan, but there's a finiteness to this earth and to this solar system. Everything is finite. There's impermanence at all levels. So the nature of time is that embedded within it is change and coming into being and perishing. So within that matrix of time, there is no secure refuge. There's nowhere to escape that changeableness. That's why we seek out the unconditioned, which is akaliko, is timeless, is beyond time. It has no reference to time. It's called Nibbana. One of the epithets of Nibbana is amata, the deathless. One of Ajahn Sumedho's books is the door to the deathless. Right? So the Pali is amata, deathless. And that's quite different a concept from saying immortal, which would be nitya. Nitya, or immortal, would be an endless extension in time, whereas akaliko is stepping outside of time altogether. No reference to time. So it's a quite different concept. There's also the concept in Buddhism of time being beginningless and endless, like within samsara is a continuous process. The Buddha himself actually said that there's no way of knowing the beginning or final ending of the universe, and that it's a fruitless speculation, so a waste of mental energy. So he never himself stated that samsara was without beginning. He said it was without discernible beginning. It was the closest he came. It cannot be, the beginning cannot be discerned. But later, in the commentaries, and later they became quite explicit about saying that time is without a first beginning. This is a concept that is perhaps sometimes first encountered, it may be a little difficult to approach. I think the human mind wants the neatness of a first moment of origin, but there's no logical necessity for that. Logically, there does not have to be a first cause. You can always go back in time one moment prior to whatever arbitrary moment you look at, so that the extension is without beginning, without end. There's also the sense very strong in the Indian worldview that there's a great cyclical nature, a great repetitiveness in time, that the same patterns unfold over and over, not necessarily identically. In fact, from what evidence there is in the texts, when they talk about previous Buddhas and things, there's always variations. So it's not a perfect replication, but there's similar events occur, similar patterns unfold. There's nothing really new. Everything's going through the same cycle over and over. I think this was very strong in the psyche in Indian culture, because it's always struck me that the one sort of area of learning that India was really weak on was chronology and history. They were superb mathematicians and astronomers and physicians and philosophers beyond anybody else, but they never really bothered with history or chronology. So for anyone nowadays studying ancient Indian history, it's a muddle. The first sure dates we have for Indian history only begin with the invasion of Alexander, because we have that from the Greek side. So the Indians never thought of history as being important. It's just stuff happening in the cycle, right? Whereas west of India, in Persia and Middle East and in Europe, there was this eschatological view of the universe being created at a certain date, going through a sequence of historical events and ending with some kind of final apocalypse. So it gives an importance to discrete events, right? They're part of the story. They matter. Whereas in India, it's just more of the pattern unfolding. It'll happen before, it'll happen again. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to be too fussed about it. So if mentally we're able to situate ourselves both in the present moment, the infinitesimal, and also in the vastness of time and the unfolding of world systems, these are both ways of getting away from the preoccupations of our life, the dramas in our life. This is what is a kind of a major difficulty in our spiritual unfolding, is becoming preoccupied with our personal stuff, right? Like making it personal. And we're caught up in our own life crises, the drama of our relationships and our problems, and this all seems so really important, and we get caught in that, and then we miss both the big picture and the present moment. Samsara is not a personal problem. And if you could unravel and solve all your personal problems and dramas, you'd still be in samsara. It's not it's not the primary thing. It's like one of the contemporary Burmese masters who taught in the West, and he was asked, why is it that it seems that in Asia, the people in Burma, Thailand, Burma, the people who take to meditation, they seem to make rapid progress, but Westerners seem to struggle for a long time. Sometimes they meditate for years and years and don't seem to really have any results. And this Burmese master said that from what he's observed, a lot of Westerners don't understand Vipassana at all. Instead of doing Vipassana, they do self-psychoanalysis. I read this in an article on Buddhism and psychology, and the comment of the author, Jack Engler, who's a Vipassana teacher himself, his explanation of that is that, which I also thought was very good, he said that Westerners are obsessed with the content of the mind, whereas the goal of Vipassana should be to understand the process. And the content is more or less irrelevant. It's only relevant in that that's what we've got to work with. That those are the objects we have to look at. But what we're trying to understand and unravel is the process. So the content of a thought is not as important as the process of thinking, in terms of understanding and the deep unraveling that we should be doing in our practice.
Handamayam Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karam Dharamase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu.